Such a great lineup. Thank you very much to I feel humbled, that's the word, isn't it, to come afterwards. Those were all great readings. I wasn't trained from the age of 3 to be a wrestler. In fact, thinking about it, I was probably in some ways trained to write this book, which is called Wrestliana. And my great-great-great-grandfather, this is all the way back to Regency times, was a champion wrestler. I'm called Toby Litt, he was called William Litt. And one of the books that's buried within this book is me using his book called Wrestliana, which was one of the first books ever about wrestling, Cumberland, Westmoreland wrestling. Me using that as a training manual, because I knew at some point I would have to do what this chapter is about, which is actually wrestling. So, I just need to say that the guy I introduced halfway through, Roger Robson, wrote the book Cumberland Westmoreland Wrestling, which is the definitive history of that sport, and that's the kind of wrestling I was going to do. And you start that wrestling already bound onto your opponent. You don't have catch as catch can wrestling, you don't try and grab them. And this is what happened roughly on the 23rd of March 2016, when I went up to do actual wrestling. All the way up to Carlisle on the train, I read and reread the practical bits of Wrestliana and thought about how in 5 hours, then 4 hours, then 3, I could be riding in an ambulance. I knew fairly certainly which injuries I feared most. I constructed a sliding scale. At the top, the very top, there was quadriplegia, a broken neck and me in a wheelchair, unable to hug my children, scanning websites for advances in robot exoskeletons. Then there was the fractured lower vertebra, keeping me away from my desk, perhaps forever. There was the ruptured knee ligament. In the days before, I'd started to notice how many of the men I saw were limping as they walked. I started to walk with an imaginary limp myself, because I thought a knee injury the likeliest. I flashed forward to the serious painkiller addiction that would follow. Next, there was the broken collarbone and the dislocated shoulder. By the time I got this far down the line, I was starting to bargain. Okay, I thought I'd settle for that. Broken collarbone. Badly strained wrist. Yes, that will be fine, as long as it was the non-writing hand. Can we make it the left wrist? Usually when I travel by train, I like to look out the window and drift off. I play Nick Drake songs and make notes in a black notebook. This time, as the clock ticked down towards my A&E appointment, I went urgently through Wrestliana, searching for 200-year-old tips. What did William say about avoiding being thrown? He said, the defendant should feel his feet firm upon the ground, slack his hold, and bear forward with his breast against the assailants. That seemed plain enough. What was his best tip for knowing what the other wrestler was about to do? He stressed, the judgment formed by feeling with the chest and breast what kind of assault is likely to prove most effective was the way. A little later on, William, after repeating tips about the chest, confirms this. It is the feel and not the sight which generally regulates the movements of a good wrestler, especially at the commencement of a contest. I felt like I was listening to Yoda. The chest you must feel. When I began to lose it, that's probably the worst Yoda impression ever. That's the worst I've ever done. When I began to lose attention, I thought about Asminder Asminderson, one of the wrestlers I'd seen, hitting the grass of Ennerdale with a crunch. I reread William's words more intensely. Roger Robson met me at the station. I was carrying my suitcase down off the stairs from the opposite platform. Roger gave my upper arm a squeeze. Some muscles there, he said. We'll see what use you make of them. I could tell he was looking forward to this. Jill collected us in the black Skoda. After a quick trip back to the farm to deal with a flood in the barn and feed Jules the bull and to eat dinner, I wasn't sure I should have eaten. We drove to Curragh House. Every Wednesday evening from October to April, the Carlisle Wrestling Club meets there. Through some gates at the side room is the small room. The coaches there are Andrew Carlisle, Alan Jones and Tom Harrington. There's a monthly points competition. It's slightly bigger than a tennis court, blue mats a couple of inches thick, and 30 or so people sat watching the youngsters. Most of those getting ready to take part were young farmers. A call had gone out on Facebook. This was the last chance to have a go this year. They were shy, jokey. One of the boys wore a t-shirt that read, "Forget farming, let's do carpentry." Does anyone know this t-shirt? "Forget farming, let's do carpentry. We'll get hammered and then I'll nail you." We warmed up. This meant running in a circle on the blue mats, then turning sideways and keeping going. Then touching down left and right hands, left and right knees, and that was it. There weren't even any groin stretches. "Warmed up?" Andrew Carlisle asked. Everyone harumphed yes. Along the far wall were school benches, the long, low pine sort, with robot nipples of rubber sticking up at both ends, 3 in a row. Andrew Carlisle asked us to stand in a line, smallest at one end, and oh my God, I don't have to wrestle him at the other. I ended up in the middle, two female young farmers in orange polo shirts to my right. We sat down and Andrew and Alan showed us some basic clips, theory and practice. I was very aware how difficult I find having something physical demonstrated to me and then actually doing it is. For example, depressing the clutch when you're about to change gear whilst checking the rear view mirror as you're going round a roundabout. I failed my driving test first time and didn't retake it for 15 years because I knew I'd fail again. The shortest pair of wrestlers from the bottom end of the bench were called up. Andrew asked the next wrestlers to be ready to come on straight away, no messing. Then, soon, far too soon, although I'd successfully delayed it for months, I was called onto the mat. I felt amazed horror. You're really doing this. You haven't wimped out. But there was only about a second for that before the handshake, before I was remembering right arm over, left arm under. The two girls beside me had been beaten by a young man who was shorter than them, so I was against him. We put our arms around one another. I'd seen it so many times during the previous summer. I demonstrated the whole to my sons Henry and George, but it still felt extraordinarily weird being held in a tight hug with someone I'd never even spoken to. I could smell his hair, his earwax. I concentrated on my chest and his chest. Trust William, I thought. Young farmer number 1 versus not young writer. Chest. Feel the chest. Somehow, without really knowing how, I'd won. And crap, after a handshake and another handshake, I had to go again. Thank you.